My name is Arthur. A few months ago, my only son, the boy I raised and worked my fingers to the bone for, sat right here in my living room and watched as his wife slid a piece of paper across the table that would take everything from me. He told me it was for my own good, that it was just a formality so they could have peace of mind. I looked into his eyes, searching for the child I once knew, but all I found was a stranger waiting for me to sign away my life's work. My own flesh and blood treated me like a piece of furniture that was no longer useful. It's a cold, hard feeling to be erased by the one person you thought would always have your back. What would you do in my place? Listen to my story until the end and tell me, what would you have done? I'd also like to know what city you're listening from. I just need to feel like I'm not the only one who has gone through something like this. If you want to hear more stories about life and dignity, subscribe to the channel. It all happened on a Tuesday, one of those gray, damp afternoons we get here in the Philly suburbs that makes your bones ache. Robert and his wife, Susan, showed up unannounced, which was strange. They hadn't visited in months. They came in with fake smiles plastered on their faces, carrying a leather briefcase that looked completely out of place on my old coffee table. Susan started by asking about my health, her voice dripping with a sweetness so phony it made my teeth hurt. She said they were worried about me being all alone, about the house being too much for me to handle. I knew right then it wasn't a social call. They weren't there to see me. They were there to see my house, my savings, the life I built with my own two hands. The tension was so thick you could feel it pressing down on you, a heavy silence between their empty pleasantries and my growing dread. Susan was the one who pulled the documents out of the briefcase. She spread them out on the table, right next to the faded picture of my late wife, Eleanor. The nerve of it still gets me. Arthur, she said, her voice turning sharp and businesslike, it's for your own good. You're just not up to handling these things anymore. We need to get your affairs in order. She spoke as if I were already gone, as if I was just a ghost in my own home. I looked at the legal jargon, the fine print, the lines that would give them power of attorney, that would change my will to their liking. I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me. For 60 years I'd been a master carpenter, a man who could build a house from the ground up, a man people trusted. And now, in my own living room, I was being told I wasn't competent enough to manage my own life. I turned to Robert, my son. I was waiting for him to step in, to tell his wife to back off, to show me a shred of the respect I thought I'd earned. But he just sat there, staring at a spot on the floor, unable to meet my gaze. That was the moment that truly broke me. His silence was louder than her insults. Finally, he mumbled, "Just sign it, Dad. It's just a piece of paper so we can have peace of mind and take better care of you. Take care of me." The words hung in the air, hollow and cruel. They didn't want to take care of me. They wanted to take control. They wanted my house, the one Eleanor and I poured our souls into. Brick by brick. They wanted to liquidate my life so they could fund their own, and my son couldn't even look me in the eye while he was helping them do it. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen they'd so helpfully placed on top of the signature line. It wasn't the tremor of an 85-year-old man. It was the shaking of a heart being shattered. I didn't say a word. What was there to say? Arguing would have been pointless. It would have only given them the satisfaction of seeing me fight a battle I was meant to lose. As I signed my name, my old dog Buddy, who had been sleeping at my feet, lifted his head and let out a low, guttural growl, his eyes fixed on Susan. He knew. Animals always know. I reached down and rested my hand on his warm back, feeling the solid, unconditional loyalty beneath my palm. He was the only one in that room who was on my side. In that moment of complete betrayal, as my signature dried on the page, I felt a strange calm. They thought they had won. They had no idea what I had already done. After they left, the silence in this house was heavier than I'd ever known. It wasn't the quiet peace I used to share with Eleanor. It was an empty, suffocating silence. I looked at the armchair where she used to sit, knitting, while I read the paper. We built this life, this very room, on a foundation of promises. We promised to work hard, to be honest, and to always, always have each other's back. We had nothing when we started, just calloused hands and a belief that our love was enough to build a world. To see that world threatened not by strangers or misfortune, but by the son we raised within these walls, it's a pain that settles deep in your bones, a cold that no blanket can warm. It makes you question every sacrifice, every long day you ever worked. I grew up poor back in rural Pennsylvania, in a little town where everyone knew your business and your worth was measured by the sweat on your brow. My father was a man of few words, but he taught me everything I needed to know about being a man. He taught me that your name is all you really have, and you protect it with honest work. We didn't have much, but we never owed anyone a dime. We ate what we grew, we fixed what was broken, and we learned that dignity wasn't something you could buy. It was something you earned every single day by looking people in the eye and keeping your word. That's the world I came from, a world where a handshake was a binding contract and family was supposed to be your fortress. When I was barely 20, I moved to the outskirts of Philly, looking for more than what my small town could offer. I found work as a mason's apprentice, and my hands, already tough, got tougher. That's when I met Eleanor. She worked at a diner where I'd get my coffee every morning. She had a smile that could light up a room, and eyes that saw right through the cement dust and grime on my clothes. She saw the man I wanted to be. Other girls might have looked down on a fella like me, with no fancy education or big prospects, but not her. She saw the dreams I was trying to build, and she wanted to build them with me. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. Our first years together were lean. We lived in a cramped second-floor apartment that was freezing in the winter and sweltering in the summer. But it was ours. We'd sit at our little kitchen table at night, and I'd draw out plans for our house on napkins. Our house. Eleanor would trace the lines with her finger and say, "It's going to be beautiful, Arthur. I can see it already." We saved every penny. I took every extra job I could get, and she was a master at stretching a dollar until it screamed. We weren't just saving money, we were saving for a future, for a place where our kids could run in the yard and we could grow old together. Her belief in me was the fuel that kept me going. Then Robert was born, and the world shifted on its axis. I'd never felt a love so fierce, so absolute. I remember holding him for the first time, this tiny, perfect being, his little hand wrapped around my finger. I looked at his face and made a silent vow. I swore that he would never know the kind of scarcity I grew up with. He would have every opportunity, every advantage I never had. He would be educated, respected. He would have a life easier than mine. Every nail I hammered, every brick I laid from that day forward, was for him. He became the center of our universe, the living embodiment of all our hopes and hard work. That's when I started building this house. It wasn't a job, it was a mission. I bought this plot of land with our savings, and every evening, after my regular job, every single weekend for 2 years, I was out here. I dug the foundation, framed the walls, laid the roof, all with my own 2 hands. Eleanor would bring me sandwiches and lemonade, her belly growing with our son. She'd watch me work, a proud look on her face. This house isn't just wood and nails and concrete. It's made of tired muscles and scraped knuckles. It's made of Eleanor's faith and my promise to my boy. Every room holds an echo of that sacrifice, that love. I remember Robert's childhood like a movie reel of perfect moments, all set against the backdrop of this home. I can still see him taking his first steps on this very living room floor, crashing into the coffee table. I taught him how to ride a bike in the driveway, holding onto the seat until he wobbled away on his own, shouting with pure joy. We had a spot on the kitchen door frame where we marked his height every year on his birthday, a ladder of pencil marks climbing higher and higher. It was a good life, a simple life. We weren't rich, but we had everything that mattered. We had each other, and we had this home, a fortress built not just to keep the weather out, but to keep our family safe and together. My biggest dream, for myself, was to one day open my own small construction business. Arthur and Son, maybe. But when Robert got older, he had different plans. He was smart, and he wanted to go to college to get a business degree. It was a world I didn't understand, a world of suits and offices, not work boots and sawdust. But it was what he wanted, and I had made him a promise. The money we had saved for my business, we used it for his tuition instead. I never thought twice about it. Seeing him walk across that stage in his cap and gown, holding that diploma, that was my reward. I felt a pride so deep it ached. I'd done it. I'd given my son the life I'd always dreamed for him. Then Eleanor got sick. It started slowly, then it took over our lives. The house that was once filled with laughter became quiet, filled with the scent of medicine and the hushed tones of doctors. I became her nurse, her rock. I learned to cook the soft food she could eat. I helped her walk. I sat by her bed for hours, just holding her hand, telling her stories of our youth. It was the hardest work I've ever done, harder than any construction job. Through it all, she never lost her grace. She was my brave girl until the very end. Those years stripped away everything that wasn't essential, and all that was left was the raw, powerful love that had started it all. Just before she passed, she made me promise her something. She was weak, her voice a whisper, but her eyes were as clear and strong as the day I met her. "Arthur," she said, gripping my hand, "watch over our boy. He's a good man, but sometimes he forgets where he comes from. Don't let him forget." Then she looked at me, a look that pierced my soul. "And most of all, Arthur, protect your dignity. It's the only thing we truly have in the end. Don't ever let anyone take that from you." I promised her. I swore on our life together that I would honor her words. A promise to a dying woman is a sacred thing. It's a debt you carry with you for the rest of your days. After she was gone, the house felt like a huge, empty shell. The silence was deafening. Robert was all I had left of her, the last living piece of our shared history. For a while, he was good about it. He'd call, he'd visit, we'd share a meal, talk about his work. I tried to keep our family traditions alive, making Eleanor's pot roast for Sunday dinners, but it wasn't the same. I could feel him pulling away, getting lost in his own world, a world that had less and less space for his old man. The phone calls got shorter, the visits less frequent. I told myself he was just busy, building his own life. I didn't want to see what was really happening. Then he married Susan. At first I was happy for him. She was polished and ambitious, and I thought she would be good for Robert. But from the beginning, there was something in the way she looked at me, at this house. It was a polite, dismissive glance, as if she was evaluating an old piece of furniture she couldn't wait to replace. She'd talk about their new friends, their country club, their trips. She made our world, the world Robert grew up in, seem small and shabby, and I watched my son start to see it through her eyes. He stopped talking about the old days. He started making excuses for why they couldn't come over. The first real blow came on Thanksgiving, about 5 years ago. It was always Eleanor's favorite holiday, and I'd always hosted. I spent 2 days cooking, getting everything just right, the way she used to. An hour before they were supposed to arrive, Susan called. She said one of their friends had invited them to a more formal gathering, and it was a networking opportunity Robert couldn't miss. Her voice had no apology in it, just a cool finality. I stood there in the kitchen, the smell of turkey and pumpkin pie filling the empty house, and I understood. We weren't family anymore. We were an obligation they had found a way to avoid. I ate my dinner alone that year, with just Buddy at my feet. When my great-grandchildren were born, I thought it would bring us closer. I dreamed of holding them, of telling them stories about their great-grandmother, but I was kept at arm's length. They'd bring the kids over for a brief supervised visit, but I was never allowed to just be a grandpa. The excuses were always ready. "He's too loud for great-grandpa. We don't want to tire you out." They have a very strict schedule. They built a wall around my own family, and I was on the outside looking in. I became a distant relative, a photograph on the mantelpiece they had to visit once in a while, out of a sense of duty. I'll never forget my 80th birthday. I sat by the phone all day. I knew they were busy, but I just hoped. The call finally came around 9 o'clock at night. It was Robert. He sounded rushed, distracted. I could hear Susan in the background, telling him they were late for a dinner reservation. He sang a quick, off-key, "Happy birthday," asked if I was doing okay, and then said he had to run. The call lasted less than a minute. After he hung up, I just sat there in the dark, the phone heavy in my hand. Buddy came and rested his head on my knee, looking up at me with his sad, knowing eyes. He knew. He always knew. That was the loneliest I had ever felt. All of this, all these memories, the promises, the sacrifices, the love, the slow, painful chipping away at my heart, it all flashed through my mind as I sat there, looking at that piece of paper on my coffee table. I saw Eleanor's face. I felt the weight of my promise to her. I looked at Robert, my son, the boy I built this house for, and he couldn't even meet my eyes. He was a stranger. The betrayal wasn't just him wanting my house. It was him agreeing to erase the man who gave him everything, the father who loved him without question. They thought they were taking my future, but what they were really trying to steal was my past, and that I could not allow. The change didn't happen overnight. It was a slow poison, a gradual chilling of the air that you don't notice until you find yourself shivering in a room that used to be warm. In the first year after Eleanor passed, Robert was my shadow. He'd call every day, stop by after work with groceries, and sit with me on the porch, neither of us saying much. We were two men adrift in the same sea of grief, and for a little while we were each other's lifeboat. I thought, this is it. This is the bond that will see me through. I was so wrong. The tide began to turn the day he brought Susan home to meet me for the first time. She was all smiles and handshakes, but her eyes were like a surveyor's, measuring every room, every piece of furniture, calculating its worth and finding it wanting. Susan had a way of complimenting things that felt like an insult. "Oh, Arthur, what a charming rustic home," she'd say, her gaze lingering on a water stain on the ceiling from a leak I'd fixed 20 years ago. She'd talk about potential and updates, about how a modern touch could really increase the property value. She was planting seeds in Robert's mind, little ideas that I was living in the past, that my life, the one I built with his mother, was a relic. He started using her words. "Dad, Susan was thinking maybe we could get you a new couch. This one is looking a bit tired." Tired. This was the couch Eleanor and I picked out together, the one where we held our newborn son. It wasn't tired. It was full of life, but to them it was just old. The holidays were the first things to go. For years, this house was the heart of our family celebrations. Eleanor would cook for days, and the smell of her baking would fill every corner. After she was gone, I tried to keep it going. I'd spend all of Thanksgiving morning cooking a turkey, making her stuffing, setting the big dining room table just as she would have. The first year, they came. The second, they were late. The third year, Susan called an hour before dinner. A last-minute invitation to her boss's house, a major career opportunity for Robert. Her voice was brittle, unapologetic. I sat at that big table with a feast for 10 and ate a single plate of food in silence, Buddy whining softly at my feet. The empty chairs screamed at me. That was the first time I truly felt it. I was no longer a priority, I was an option. Then came the great-grandchildren. I had imagined myself as a doting great-grandfather, bouncing them on my knee, showing them how to build things with scraps of wood in my workshop. But I was never given the chance. Their visits were like royal processions, short and heavily managed. "Don't get too close, you'll get sawdust on 'em," Susan would say, pulling little James away when I tried to show him a simple birdhouse I'd made. "We have to go. It's his nap time," she'd announce after 20 minutes, just as I was starting to feel a connection. Robert would just stand there, nodding in agreement, his phone in his hand. They treated me like I was a contamination, a fragile, dusty antique you look at but don't dare touch. My own blood was kept from me by a wall of excuses. I saw the change in Robert most clearly in his eyes. The warmth that used to be there was replaced by a kind of weary impatience. He started looking at me the way you look at a problem you have to solve. One Saturday he came over alone, which was rare. He sat me down in the living room, in this very chair, and started talking about downsizing. He said the house was too big for me, that the upkeep was a burden. "Dad, we found this wonderful senior community. It's clean, safe. You'd have people your own age." He presented it like a gift, a solution to a problem I didn't know I had. He wasn't seeing his father who loved his home. He was seeing a liability, an asset that was being mismanaged. When I told him I was never leaving Eleanor's house, a flash of anger crossed his face before he quickly hid it. My birthdays became a sad joke. I used to love them. Eleanor would make my favorite cake, and the house would be full of noise and laughter. After she was gone, it became a reminder of what I'd lost. On my 80th, I waited all day for a call. It finally came late in the evening. Robert was at a restaurant. I could hear the clatter of plates and loud chatter in the background. "Happy birthday, Dad." "Sorry, we're out with some clients," he said, his voice rushed. He put me on speaker, and Susan chimed in with a cheerful, meaningless, "Happy birthday, Arthur," before Robert said they had to go. The call lasted 45 seconds. I hung up and stared into the darkness of the room. It would have hurt less if they had forgotten altogether. The perfunctory call was worse. It was a box being ticked on a to-do list. I started to feel invisible. They'd come over, supposedly to check on me, but they'd stand in my kitchen and talk about their mortgage, their vacation plans, their investments, as if I wasn't even there. They'd speak about me in the third person. "We need to get someone to look at his roof," Susan would say to Robert, while I was sitting right at the table. "He really shouldn't be climbing ladders anymore." I wanted to scream, "I'm right here! I can still hear! I can still think!" But I didn't. I just sat there, sipping my coffee, becoming smaller and smaller until I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. The silence was my only defense, my only pathetic piece of dignity. Arguing would have just confirmed their narrative that I was becoming difficult. The final straw with the great-grandchildren broke something deep inside me. It was a summer afternoon, and they'd stop by for one of their fleeting visits. My oldest great-grandson, little Leo, was fascinated by Buddy. He was petting him, giggling as Buddy licked his hand. It was a pure, beautiful moment. I smiled and said, "Buddy's been my best friend since your great-grandma passed." Susan swooped in immediately, a bottle of hand sanitizer appearing as if by magic. "Okay, Leo, that's enough. We don't know where that dog has been. Go wash your hands." She looked at Buddy with disgust, and then at me, as if we were both equally unclean. She wasn't just insulting my dog, she was erasing my comfort, my history, my last living link to loyalty. That evening, after they had gone, leaving behind a sterile silence and the faint chemical smell of sanitizer, I finally understood. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about me, my very existence, my memories, my way of life. It was all an inconvenience to them. I was a loose end from a previous chapter of Robert's life that he and his wife were eager to tie up and put away. I was the old furniture that clashed with their new decor. I walked through the quiet house, my hand trailing along the walls I had built, and I saw Eleanor's face everywhere. I remembered her words, her final fierce plea, "Protect your dignity, Arthur. Don't ever let anyone take that from you." In that moment, I knew that promise was not just about standing tall, but about acting smart. They saw me as a feeble old man, a relic of a bygone era, too tired and too sad to fight back. They underestimated me. They mistook my grief for weakness, my silence for surrender. They had no idea that beneath the surface of the quiet, lonely father they visited out of duty, the spirit of the man who built this house from nothing was still very much alive. I wasn't angry anymore. The hurt had burned away and left something cold and hard in its place, a plan. A quiet, unmovable resolve to honor my wife, to protect my life's work, and to teach my son one final, painful lesson about what truly has value. They thought they were in control. They thought the game was over. But they didn't know that I had already made my move, long before they ever slid that piece of paper across the table. The visits became less frequent after I refused to discuss selling the house. The distance grew, and it was a relief. The pretense was exhausting. I preferred the honest emptiness of the house to the dishonest fullness when they were in it. I had my routine. Me and Buddy. We'd walk in the morning, I'd work in my shop, fixing things for neighbors, not for money, but just to keep my hands busy. I'd read the paper. I watched the seasons change through the window Eleanor and I had installed together. I was lonely, yes, but I wasn't pathetic. There is a difference. Loneliness is a state of being. Pathetic is a state of mind. They thought I was both. Their perception of me was their greatest miscalculation. They saw a stooped old man in worn-out clothes, living in a house that needed a coat of paint. They didn't see the years of labor etched into my hands, or the sharp mind that was still calculating, observing, and planning. They saw what they wanted to see, a simple problem with a simple solution. Get the old man to sign the papers, sell the house, and move on. Their greed had blinded them to who I really was. It was a blindness I had started to count on. My silence wasn't just about preserving dignity anymore. It had become a strategic tool. I remember one of the last times they visited before that final fateful day with the documents. Susan was complaining about the cost of a private school for the kids. She sighed dramatically, looking around my living room. "If only we had a little more financial breathing room," she said, her eyes landing on a framed photo of me and Eleanor on our wedding day. It was a direct hit, a clear message. My home, my life's savings, were their breathing room. Robert just shifted uncomfortably. He didn't defend me. He didn't defend his mother's memory. He just let her words hang in the air, a toxic cloud poisoning everything. That was when I made the final call to my lawyer, a man almost as old as me, a friend who had handled my affairs for 40 years. I told him what was happening. The pressure, the coldness. He wasn't surprised. He'd seen it 100 times. "Dignity, Arthur," he said to me over the phone, his voice firm. "That's the asset we protect now." We finalized the details of a plan I had been considering for years, a plan that was born from my promise to Eleanor. It was a quiet act of defiance, A fortress built of paper and legal ink, far stronger than the one of brick and mortar they were trying to seize. So when they finally came with their briefcase and their predatory smiles, I was ready. I wasn't just an old man being ambushed in his living room. I was an actor playing a part. One had rehearsed for months. The part of a defeated man. I let my hand tremble. I let the disappointment show in my eyes. I looked to my son for a salvation I knew would never come. Every bit of it was real. The pain, the betrayal, but underneath it all was a bedrock of certainty. I knew that the signature they so desperately wanted was meaningless. It was a signature on a ghost document, a claim to an empty treasure chest. They saw my signature as their victory, the final step in their long, patient campaign to wear me down. Susan's smile was triumphant as she carefully placed the signed papers back into her briefcase. Robert managed a weak, relieved smile, finally able to look at me. "It's for the best, Dad. You'll see. We'll take good care of everything now." He patted my shoulder, a gesture so empty of warmth it was almost comical. They thought they were taking my house, my savings, my future. They had no idea they were taking absolutely nothing. As they walked out the door, I felt a strange sense of peace. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the sound of loneliness anymore. It was the sound of closure. I had been abandoned by my own son, but I had not abandoned myself. I had not abandoned my promise to Eleanor. I had protected my dignity in the only way I had left. I reached down and scratched Buddy behind the ears. He looked up at me, his tail giving a slow, steady thump against the floor. He was a good boy, the best boy. He had no idea he was about to become the wealthiest dog in Pennsylvania. The cruelty of it all was its subtlety. It wasn't one big, dramatic act of abandonment. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. A forgotten birthday here, a condescending comment there. It was the slow erosion of respect, the gradual replacement of love with obligation. It's a quiet violence that leaves no visible bruises, but it breaks you just the same. They didn't throw me out of my home. They just made me feel like an unwelcome guest in it, until I was so small and quiet that signing away my life seemed like the only logical next step. But they forgot who I was. They forgot I was a builder. And a builder always checks the foundation before he signs anything over. What Robert and Susan never understood, what they were incapable of understanding, is that a man's worth isn't just in his bank account, it's in his word, his skill, and the trust he earns. They saw a retired carpenter living on a small pension in an old house. They saw a liability. They never saw the man I was for 40 years, the man who built a reputation as solid as the foundations I poured. They saw the tired flannel shirts, but they never saw the man inside them. Their blindness was my greatest asset. They thought they were playing checkers with a simple old man, but I was playing a long, quiet game of chess, a game I had started setting up decades ago, with the help of a man they never even knew existed. His name was Mr. Henderson, a big-time developer I did a lot of work for back in the 70s and 80s. I wasn't his friend. A man like that doesn't have friends, he has associates. But he respected my work. He'd show up on a site, walk right past the foremen and architects, and come find me. "Arthur," he'd say, "I know if you're on the job, the bones of this building are good." He paid me well, but more than that, he paid me respect. One day, after we finished a big project, he took me aside. He said, "Arthur, you're the most honest man I know. Don't die with nothing but calluses to show for it. I'm going to give you a piece of advice, not as a favor, but because good work deserves a future." He spread a map out on the hood of his shiny Cadillac. It was a map of the county, showing all the land ringing the city. He pointed to a few desolate-looking parcels way out on the fringes, places that were nothing but fields and woods back then. "Buy dirt, Arthur," he told me, his voice low and serious. "God isn't making any more of it. These plots are cheap now because they're in the middle of nowhere. But in 20 years, the city will come to them. People like me will pay a fortune for them." He wasn't offering to give me anything. He was offering me a blueprint. He was showing me how the world really worked, far beyond the weekly paycheck. Eleanor and I talked about it for weeks. It was a huge risk. The money we'd have to use was the nest egg we had painstakingly saved. The money I dreamed of using to start my own Arthur and Son business one day. It felt like betting our future on a rich man's hunch. But Eleanor, she had this incredible intuition. She trusted my judgment, and she saw the wisdom in Mr. Henderson's advice. "Let's do it, Arthur," she said one night. "Let's plant a tree we might not sit under, but one our family can." So we did. We bought that first 5-acre plot of land. It was a quiet, secret act, a gamble on a future we couldn't yet see. We never told Robert about it, not even when he was a young man. It wasn't about mistrusting him back then. It was about something else. It was ours, a secret garden Eleanor and I were tending to. It was a foundation separate from the house, a different kind of security. We lived simply, never changing our lifestyle, never hinting that we had anything more than my carpenter's wages. The money from my paychecks built our daily life. The land was a silent promise for a different kind of safety, a bulwark against the unexpected storms of life. It felt sacred, in a way, a testament to our partnership, hidden in plain sight on a county deed filed away in a safe deposit box. As years passed, Eleanor's wisdom on the matter only deepened. She saw things I didn't. She saw the way the world was changing, the way money was starting to mean more to people than character. As Robert got older and started his business career, she'd watch him, a thoughtful, almost sad look in her eyes. "He's a good boy, Arthur," she'd say, "but he has a hunger in him that we don't. He sees the world in dollars and cents." She was the one who insisted we keep the investments completely separate and secret. "Some things are a test," she once told me. "Let's hope he never has to take this one." She was protecting him, in her own way, from a temptation she feared he wouldn't be able to resist. Just as Mr. Henderson predicted, the city grew. The middle of nowhere slowly became the suburbs. That first plot of land we bought for a pittance sat there for 15 years, and then, almost overnight, its value exploded. A development company came calling, wanting to build a housing tract. The offer they made was staggering. It was more money than I had earned in a decade of hard labor. We sold it, and following Mr. Henderson's long-ago advice, we didn't just spend it. We diversified. We were quiet. We were careful. We were still just Arthur and Eleanor, living in the house I built. No one ever knew. With the help of my lawyer, a good old-fashioned man named Mr. Gable, we turned that one sale into a quiet, steady stream of security. We bought another, smaller piece of land further out. We took a portion and invested it in a conservative portfolio of stocks, blue-chip companies, the kind that don't make you rich quick, but don't let you go broke either. We also bought a small, 2-bedroom apartment in a decent part of the city, which we rented out. Over the years, through careful management, that initial investment grew. By the time Robert and Susan sat in my living room with their papers, my secret nest egg, the one they had no clue existed, was worth just shy of $1 million. About $950,000 to be more precise. The irony was so thick it was almost funny. They looked at me with such pity, this poor old man who needed their help to manage his meager existence. I remember Susan once offering to help me create a monthly budget for my pension, pulling out her phone calculator with a condescending smile. "It's so hard to make ends meet these days, Arthur. We just want to make sure you're comfortable." I just nodded and thanked her. Robert would try to explain financial concepts to me like I was a child, talking about interest rates and property taxes in a slow, loud voice. Their condescension was the perfect invisibility cloak. They saw a relic, not a man who had quietly built a fortune right under their noses. Every time they treated me like that, every time Susan sighed about their country club fees, or Robert complained about the cost of his kid's private school while looking around my shabby house, it was like a hammer blow reinforcing the wall around my secret. It solidified my resolve. This wealth wasn't just money. It was the physical manifestation of my life's work, of Eleanor's faith, of my own quiet shrewdness. It was my dignity, converted into a currency they could understand, but would never, ever be allowed to touch. Giving it to them would have been the ultimate betrayal of the man I was, and the woman Eleanor had believed me to be. That promise I made to Eleanor on her deathbed, "Protect your dignity, Arthur," it echoed in my head constantly. At first, I thought it just meant standing up for myself, not letting them push me around. But as their neglect turned to avarice, I realized it meant something more. It meant being smarter than them. It meant protecting not just my feelings, but the very substance of my life, the legacy of our hard work. The money was never the goal. It was the tool. It was the shield that would allow me to live and die in this house, on my own terms, without ever having to ask them for a single dime. It was the key to my freedom. The decision to formalize the final plan came on my 80th birthday, after that rushed, 45-second phone call. As I sat there in the dark, the silence of the house pressing in on me, the hurt finally crystallized into a cold, clear purpose. The son I had raised, the boy for whom I sacrificed my own dreams, was gone. In his place was a man who saw his father as a line item on a balance sheet. The next morning I called Mr. Gable. I told him, "It's time. Let's put the plan in motion. Eleanor's plan." There was no anger in my voice. There was just a quiet finality. The grief was over. The time for strategy had begun. Sitting in Mr. Gable's dusty, book-lined office felt like coming home. He was a man from my generation, a man who understood that a contract was built on character, not just clauses. We had been preparing for this possibility for years, ever since Eleanor's passing. We went over the documents for the trust, the wording precise, the instructions ironclad, every asset, the stocks, the rental property, the remaining plot of land, and yes, even the house they were so desperate to get their hands on was to be moved into this legal fortress. It was an elegant, simple, and completely unbreakable plan. Signing those papers felt like the truest thing I had done in years. There was a profound sense of power in that quiet act. While Robert and Susan were scheming over dinner, planning how to manage my decline, I was ensuring my legacy would be one of loyalty and love, not greed. They were so focused on the prize they could see this house that they were completely blind to the kingdom I had built in the shadows. They thought I was playing checkers, moving one piece at a time. They never realized I was the one who owned the entire board, and I was about to sweep all the pieces off it. My silence became my weapon, my perceived frailty, my shield. They underestimated me because they never truly saw me. They saw a carpenter, a man of simple tools and simple means. They forgot that a good carpenter doesn't just know how to hammer a nail. He knows how to measure twice and cut once. He understands structure. He knows how to build something that will last for 100 years, withstanding storms and pressures they can't even imagine. I didn't build my life out of wood and nails. I built it out of patience, observation, and a deep understanding of human nature. And their nature, unfortunately, had become transparently greedy. So as they walked out my door that Tuesday, clutching their worthless, newly signed papers, I felt no rage. I felt a deep, abiding calm. I walked over to the mantel and picked up the silver-framed photo of Eleanor and me on our wedding day. She was so young, so full of hope. I looked into her smiling eyes. "I kept my promise, Ellie," I whispered to the silent room. "I protected it. They can have the piece of paper. We have the last word." Buddy came over and nudged my hand with his head, as if he understood everything, and in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. I had my memories, I had my dignity, and I had a plan. The house wasn't empty. It was full of justice, waiting patiently to be served. A few weeks passed in a silence that felt different. It wasn't the heavy, lonely quiet I had grown used to. It was a clean, peaceful quiet, the kind you get after a storm has passed and washed the air. I went about my days. I worked in my shop, took Buddy for his walks, and sat on the porch swing Eleanor and I had hung 40 years ago. I didn't wait for the phone to ring. I didn't expect a call. I was simply living, for the first time in a long time, without a sense of dread hanging over me. Then, one afternoon, the phone did ring. It was my lawyer, Mr. Gable. His voice was calm, but I could hear a little bit of professional satisfaction in it. He said, "Well, Arthur, it seems the kids tried to go to the bank." The first domino had fallen, just as we planned. Mr. Gable told me Susan had walked into the local branch with the power of attorney, bold as brass, and tried to transfer the balance of my modest checking account, the only one they knew about, into their name. The bank manager, following the instructions Mr. Gable had put in place months before, politely informed her that the account had been closed, and all assets belonging to Arthur Miller were now held by a private, irrevocable trust. When Susan demanded to know the details of this trust, the manager simply said he was not at liberty to discuss it. She had apparently made quite a scene, her voice getting louder and higher, until she stormed out of the bank, red-faced and furious. My part in all of this was done. I just had to sit back and let the structure I built do its job. The inevitable call to Mr. Gable from Robert came an hour later. My lawyer recounted the conversation to me with the dry precision of a man who enjoys the letter of the law. Robert was screaming, accusing me of being senile, of being manipulated. He threatened lawsuits. Mr. Gable let him vent, and then, in the ensuing silence, he calmly explained the reality of the situation. He told Robert that months ago, I, Arthur Miller, in sound mind and body, had established the Buddy Miller Benevolent Trust. He explained that every single one of my assets, the house, the land, the stocks, the rental property, all of it, had been legally and irrevocably transferred to this trust. Its sole purpose was to provide for the comfortable care and well-being of my dog, Buddy, for the remainder of his natural life. After that call, the silence from their end became permanent. There were no more visits, no more condescending offers of help, no more rushed birthday calls. It was over. One evening, about a month later, I saw their car drive slowly down my street. It paused for a moment in front of the house. I couldn't see their faces clearly through the twilight, but I could feel their anger, their bitter disbelief, radiating from the car. They were looking at the house, the grand prize they thought they had secured, and seeing it for what it now was to them. A fortress they could never breach, a monument to their own greed. They didn't stop. They just stared for a moment, and then drove away. I never saw them again. I'm sitting on the porch now, Buddy's head resting on my lap. The sun is going down, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The house behind me is quiet, and it's mine. Every nail, every memory, every ghost is mine. I didn't do it for revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy thing. What I did was for peace. For dignity. I fulfilled my promise to Eleanor. I protected what we built, not just the money, but the principle of it. My son has his life, his ambition, his wife, and I have mine. I have the loyalty of a good dog, the comfort of my own home, and a quiet conscience. In the end, they didn't understand that a man's true wealth isn't what he leaves behind in a bank, but the integrity he keeps while he's still here. And my integrity, my dignity, was never for sale.